Okay, well, in the interest of time, I think I'll go ahead and get us started. Got another attendee. That's great. Okay, so welcome everyone. I'm gonna just share a little bit about Surge, and let me just ask real quickly, is anyone here for the first time who might not know much about Surge at this point? Has everyone been here before? Been to one of our meetings?
No, we have some new folks.
This is my first meeting.
Okay, great. Welcome, welcome. Donita, is it your first meeting too? Awesome. Okay. Well, we organize white people. SURGE stands for Stand Up for Racial Justice. And at SURGE, we're working towards a world where every community has what they need, not just to survive, but to thrive. And we believe we get there by working together and following the leadership of communities that directly experience racism and economic injustice. And we believe white people have an important role to play. And so we organize folks so that you don't have to, basically. But we do so under the leadership and guidance of accountability partners, which are organizations and people of color to give us guidance on the most important issues, et cetera. So we're glad you joined us today. And I guess we can go on to the next slide. Okay, so I wanted to share a little bit about SURGE values because I think it's important that you guys are a little bit familiar with what we believe. And so our first value is called calling people in. And this whole entire meeting was originally, the plan was to talk about calling in for the whole meeting before we decided, as the steering committee decided, that there were some more pressing issues, another pressing issue related to critical race theory and the attack on critical race theory in the schools that we thought would be really important to address now. But we will still be spending part of our time tonight talking about calling people in. And we'll be basing our talk on Dr. Loretta Ross's work. So what do we mean by calling people in? Well, we've all heard of the term calling people out. It's all too common, right? Where we shame and blame people who don't have the perfect words or don't exactly agree with or understand our analysis. And that kind of behavior doesn't help us build a mass movement for change. So we don't want to do that. We want to call people in. Calling people in is how we want to be with one another as white people. That means recognizing that we all mess up and speaking from this shared experience because it's inevitable. It means being specific and being direct. And it means talking to people in times and places that support conversations and learning. So calling people in isn't how we want to be with people in power. We organize to create tension and target people in power. So we're not always going to call them in, right? Calling them in isn't how we think change happens. We do give them the chance to maybe correct mistakes. We call that calling on. But in the event that they don't choose to or they don't want to, we're not afraid to call them out. Calling people in isn't a way to keep people in the mainstream comfortable. When people who are at the margins of a group, such as LGBTQ folks, people with disabilities, poor and working class people, when they have feedback or choose to speak, they don't need to be polite or avoid tension. So we're not afraid to cause tension at times. Accountability through collective action. We believe that change happens when we build with millions of other people to change culture, policies, and practices. And we build accountability relationships with organizations led by people of color who are doing racial justice work in the movement. Taking risks, make mistakes, learn, and make amends, and keep going. What do we mean by that? People of color take risks every day by living and moving through the world. We commit to changing ourselves to be outside our comfort zones when doing this work. And while we take on real risk, we know that the risk is always greater for people of color. Organize out of mutual interest. Racial justice isn't something we help people of color with. We must find our stake, our mutual interest in joining these fights. Many white people, like poor and working class, disabled and queer people, have always been harmed by systemic oppression and have much to gain materially from joining fights for racial and economic justice. So, and we also believe that there's enough for all. Those who benefit from the status quo saturate our culture with this lie. If Black people and people of color win, white people lose. We know this false logic only benefits the wealthy few and the people at the top, the 1%. What they fear the most is united front of people of all races fighting against them to win the things we need to live full lives. And growing is good. We need millions of white people to join the movement for racial justice to achieve the scale of change we need. This means we need our group to grow. And lastly, center class. Our culture, media, politicians blame the poor and working class white people for racism, often without recognizing that middle class and owning class white people disproportionately support policies and practices that uphold white supremacy. So we're committed to supporting the leadership of and organizing in poor and working class communities. We need people of all class backgrounds in this work. So I know that was kind of a long description of our values, but I thought it was important to share those with you all today. So the plan for today is, oh, sorry, I need to go back there. Can you take me back, Claire? Ray Jane, to the.
I can't take you back because you have control.
It keeps going forward. Let's see. Okay, here we go.
If you hit backspace when you're in presentation mode, you'll go to previous slides.
Okay, thank you. So let me go to view. Okay, here we go. Sorry, guys. I'm not the greatest at this. So, okay, so today our plan is to just have a brief introduction to Serge and one another, an overview of the anti-critical race theory efforts and strategies that are taking place currently across the US and in Ohio. We're gonna have some breakout discussions where we'd really like to hear about your concerns and your thoughts about critical race theory, especially as it applies to the schools, wherever your place is as it relates to the schools. If you're a mom, if you're an administrator, if you're a teacher, a school board member, we'd love to hear from you. And we're going to talk a little bit more about speaking out without tearing down, or in other words, calling people in whenever we can. And lastly, we'll provide some tips, resources for you to take away with you, which we think will be really helpful. Okay. So just quickly, can you all just quickly share your name and what brought you here today? If you had a particular interest in calling in or in if you're concerned about the anti-critical race theory attacks that are happening, feel free to share about what brought you here today.
So I'll start. I'm Ray Jane Arujo. I'm on the core Surge team, and I'm here to learn more about critical race theory. And I'll call on Maria.
Hello, I'm Maria. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm also on the Surge Core Committee. I am most interested in this meeting and learning how the guidance from Dr. Ross can be applied in the classroom. All right, and I will call on Rachel.
Hi, I'm Rachel Bosch. My pronouns are they, them. I'm a geologist at NKU. And additionally, I have 3 kids in the K through 12 range at home. I am in the process of kind of redesigning my geology classes, and I want to make sure that I incorporate really substantial discussions on colonialism and extractive science and environmental justice. And these are in like gen ed geology classes. So I've been meaning to attend a surge meeting for years, and the theme of tonight's meeting really spoke to me.
Awesome. So glad you made it.
Oh, I need to call on someone. How about Barb?
Hi, I'm Barb, and I'm a Spanish teacher in Indian Hill, and I'm interested in the CRT conversation. And
Awesome.
I will call on Donita.
Barb, I am a school counselor, and a colleague forwarded this information along, so I'm also interested in hearing more about CRT.
Awesome. What, do you mind me asking what age group you work with?
High
Denise?
school students.
Great, thank you.
Have we heard from, looks like Jeremy?
Hey. Well, let's see. I just wanted to just wanted to know about like what's going on as far as yeah, critical race theory and such, and just trying to stay up to date of what's happening lately.
Great. Glad you joined us, Jeremy. Who's left?
I'll go ahead. I'm Claire Hostetler. I'm on the steering committee for Surge. And I too want to learn a lot more about how to dialogue with people that are critical of critical race theory. I have been studying up on what it means or doesn't mean, but I am not as experienced in engaging with those who oppose it. But I also am intrigued by the theme of the evening too, about how to speak up without castigating people. Yeah, without casting aspersions on people. So building relationships is really important to me. I'm really glad to see everybody here tonight.
Claire, will you call on someone, please?
Who's left?
Harry,
I don't know.
Julia.
So we have Harry, Julia, and Lauren.
Julia Amagur.
Hello. I am very interested in this topic as an educator. I teach grades 1 through 6 math, and also as a diversity facilitator for faculty at my school. So this topic is of great interest to me.
Welcome, Julia.
Thanks.
Julie, will you call on somebody, please? So there's Harry and Lauren.
Harry.
Hi, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. My name's Harry. I am a lawyer. I have children. I saw this on a parent's page and just wanted to know what it was all about. So that's what I'm checking it out.
Great. Welcome, Harry. Okay, so
Lauren, will you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, sorry, I'm outside. It's a little loud. I am just a concerned citizen. I'm just looking to kind of keep my pulse on what Cincinnati is up to, kind of like what Jeremy said, and to kind of, yeah, be able to get more information on the conversation of CRT and definitely the calling in. That's it.
awesome, great.
Last but not least, Carol.
Hi, I'm Carol at Wommeldorf, and I use she, her pronouns, and I work with the folks on the steering committee here, and I want to be participating more than I can tonight, but I'm trying to eavesdrop and also do other things. So the conversation about calling in really I think is a really important challenge to try and find those folks who might be on the edge that we can bring into being more knowledgeable and advocates for racial justice. So that's really important to me. But I know that the CRT conversation and hopefully won't get has a lot of buzz right now and actual legislature in the House in Ohio here. So it's important too. So lots to learn.
Great. And I guess I should introduce myself. My name is Paula Houston, and I am also a diversity instructor, and I'm on the steering committee of SURGE. And I'm also a mom of a 7th grader in the Cincinnati public school system who is very concerned about this attack, nationwide attack on critical race theory and the impact it might have on my son's education. So, and as well as other students. So, I wanted to first acknowledge that a lot of the material that I drew from for this presentation is came from this packet that you're seeing here, Citizens for Renewing America. And we've got references and resources at the end of this presentation as well for you to get more information that we won't have time to go into today about. So let's go ahead and move forward. Before we get started, let's take a grounding, a meditation, just a 1-minute meditation. We can just take 3 deep breaths, close your eyes, and as you breathe in, remind yourself that you are here now and ready to receive whatever happens during this hour. As you breathe out, let go of the worries of the day. Okay, some key terms that we should go over before we start are obviously critical race theory. What is it? Critical race theory is a series of graduate level legal frameworks that examine the law's role in platforming, facilitating, producing, and insulating racial inequality in America through the nation's institutions, resulting in the maintained dominance of white people in society. Critical race theory also recognizes that race intersects with other identities, including sexuality, gender identity, and others. And what is cultural responsive education? Cultural responsive education is what happens, we feel, when you use critical race theory to a certain extent in school. It's a research-based approach to teaching that centers and values students' cultures and identities. It uses rigorous and relevant curriculum and anti-oppressive teaching practices to build strong, positive relationships between students, families, and school staff. This honoring of student cultures, backgrounds, and communities helps support learners in developing the knowledge, skills, and vision to transform the world. And it's always a goal with culturally responsive education to promote community and relationships. It's never ever the goal to be divisive, to cause any students to feel like they're targeted in the classroom or made to feel different or unwelcome. So that's really important to keep in mind. You may or may not have heard about the fact that there are many states that are currently having bills or legislative initiatives attacking critical race theory, or what they're calling critical race theory in the schools. Critical race theory is actually a graduate level theory, so it's really not happening in the K through 12 schools. But this depicts all the different levels or stages that these initiatives are in throughout the United States. And so just you can get a glimpse there of how many initiatives are happening right now, including in Ohio. And just a brief summary, 4 states passed legislation that would limit how teachers can discuss racism, sexism, and other controversial issues. 15 states have introduced bills that seek to restrict how teachers can discuss racism, sexism, and other issues. And so the legislation passed so far in Idaho, Iowa, Oklahoma, and Tennessee bans teachers from introducing certain concepts. Among them, that one race or sex is inherently superior, that any individual is consciously or unconsciously racist or sexist because of their race or sex, and that anyone should feel discomfort or guilt because of their race or sex. And we all know that whenever there are conversations around race, there is a level of discomfort, and that's okay. We as SURJ don't believe anyone should shy away from that, but that's how we grow. But in total, lawmakers in at least 15 states have introduced bills that restrict how teachers can discuss racism, sexism, and the legislation is all introduced by Republican lawmakers, and it uses similar language as an executive order, from President Donald Trump that he put in place to ban diversity training for federal workers. The order has since been rescinded by President Joe Biden. The supporters of these laws say they're designed to get schools to stop teaching CRT theory. But opponents, including many teachers, say that they fear such legislation will stifle discussion of how racism, sexism, and sexism have shaped the U.S. legal system, as well as many other parts of many other systems, I should say, many other structures in society. And so, here in Ohio, House Bill 322 states that no teacher shall be required by a policy. Oh, sorry, here we go again. Oh my gosh, you guys, I'm sorry. I keep doing this. No teachers shall be required by a policy to affirm a belief in the multiplicity or fluidity of gender identities or like ideas against the teacher's sincerely held religious or philosophical convictions. So teachers' religious or philosophical convictions will basically inhibit what students will learn in the classroom. The state level attacks, there are alarming themes and language in the legislation. So under this passed and proposed legislation, schools would be forbidden from having conversations that discuss the following: that one race or sex is inherently superior to another race or sex, that the US or specific states are fundamentally racist or sexist, that individuals because of their race or sex are inherently oppressive, whether consciously or unconsciously, that individuals bear responsibility for actions committed in the past by members of their same race or sex, topics that may make one feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any other form of psychological distress because of their race or sex. And they conceive that talking about race is inherently divisive, that systemic racism is not real, that we should be colorblind when solving issues of race, and that white people will be victims when we talk about race or address systemic racism in any meaningful way. So this is—
Sorry, real quick, Paula, can you go back to presentation view? I'm having a hard time reading the
Oh,
text.
sorry, yeah.
Thank you.
Mhm. Okay, so these are just a few of the headlines across the US currently about, all these attacks that are going on. And there were plenty in our own local newspapers recently. These are some examples of local headlines currently, especially focusing on the Forest Hills School District. There are some, this has become a very big issue there at a recent school board meeting. So the rhetoric is of the right is the way CRT and CSJ operate is a takeover ideology. CRT proponents do not care how they win as long as they win. They are not trying to win an academic debate. They're attempting to socially replace you. Read that line again. They are not trying to win an academic debate. They're trying to socially replace you. In other words, because people of color were discriminated against in the past, white people, including children in schools, need to be discriminated against now in order to make up for it and let African Americans catch up. Of course, these are statements that we do not agree with. Recognizing historical inequality and its lasting impacts presents a call to action for proponents of civil society to ensure all children have access to robust educational opportunities, not to stifle the opportunities of some children because of traits that they were born with. And white children are taught that they perpetuate racism, whatever their feelings. Black children are taught that love of reading and writing and the use of reason are elements of white culture, which is crazy. And all children are taught that America is a hideous place. So, and lastly, another quote is equity policy is the same as critical race theory, and that the reason why it's so damaging is it divides students into groups. It's not the same as equality or equal opportunity, which is what every parent is for and what the civil rights movement was for. That was a Colorado mother. So I just want to interject here that there are many, many well-researched, age-appropriate supplemental curricula that really bring in the diverse cultures that aren't always represented in our classrooms today. And they're very well researched. None of them are intentionally divisive. They give teachers instructions on exactly how to use them so that students aren't left feeling blamed. And you know, the concern is that there will be a chilling effect on the use of these curricula now, because teachers are going to be afraid to veer into areas that they feel will be hot button issues now, which will be anything basically related to diversity. So, okay, here we go. So what's really going on? Essential conversations about race in America are being hijacked and curtailed by broad narrative attacks. The attacks are shutting down critical race equity work and conversations and institutions across the country, primarily schools, universities, and government, and are extending further into society. These attacks on critical race theory are part of a broad, coordinated effort. Oh, gosh, I keep doing this. I'm so sorry, my Lord. Let me go back. I'm so sorry. So they're a part of a broad, coordinated effort, an attack on multiracial democracy. And it's important to remember that these attacks employ a caricature of critical race theory to distract us from enacting a racial equitable agenda, one that would provide benefits to the vast majority of people in this country, including white people. So they're not depicting critical race theory for what it really is. And our response cannot be that we abandon or malign the concept of critical race theory, but that we keep the focus on the purpose of these attacks and how having honest and courageous conversations about race, how it shows and informs our present is the key to building the promise of a just, multiracial, democratic society. So that's what we really hope to help achieve, as well as other objectives. So,
Paula, it's 8 o'clock.
yes.
So you had on your agenda that we would go into breakout rooms. I don't know where you are in
Thank
your
you.
presentation.
Okay, let's see where we're at. So here's some information. You guys will be provided with this slideshow.
Go back to presentation mode, please.
I'm going to just review these slides. I have to be able to see the slides quickly to know where I'm at here. You all will be provided with these. Okay, so here we are. We're at the breakout sessions now with these slides. So you'll be able to see any slides that we missed going over today. You can review those at your own leisure. So the first breakout group session, and thank you, Ray Jane, for keeping me on task here, is we have, I think, how many people are here in total in attendance?
We have 11 folks.
11 folks. Okay. So I provided 4 questions. So basically we can divide up in groups of 2, right? To just talk about some basic questions about growing up, our experience in school, and other things about this subject. Maria, can you read those questions?
Yes, let me go over to that document quick. So I'm also going to be copying and pasting these into the chat so you can see them when you're in the breakout room. So if we're gonna have 4 different rooms, it looks like it'll be 2 or 3 people per room. I will just paste these in the chat as well, depending on which group you're in. Actually, quick question, Paula, is it everybody do the same question and there's 4 breakouts?
No, there's a different question for each breakout room. And then we'll bring them back together and just discuss them.
Oh, okay.
Mhm.
I misunderstood that. So group 1 will be discussing, the question is, do you feel that you received a culturally responsive education when you were growing up? Why or why not? Group 2 will be discussing the question, what topics do you believe should be covered in schools? Why do you believe that it is important to cover these topics? Group 3 will be discussing what concerns you most about the anti-CRT bills and why. And group number 4 will discuss why do you think the fear of critical race theory has been an effective mobilizing issue for some white conservative activists.
Very well. And for the breakout rooms, guys, I'm just going to click on breakout rooms and.
I'm going to create the breakout rooms.
Okay, great. All right,
I'm going to manually assign them. So there is a core person in each 4 of the groups.
Awesome. I'll just be talking here while she's doing that. In Glenn Singleton's book, Courageous Conversations About Race, a field guide for achieving equity in schools, he spells out 4 critical agreements for courageous conversations. Stay engaged, feel discomfort, speak your truth, and expect and accept non-closure.
Okay, here we go. Oh, Barb, I'm sorry. Hold on.
Sorry, I actually have to take off, but thank you so much.
Let me move you. No, let me move you to 1.
Discussed what it is that will be, how we'll proceed. We haven't had pushback to this point. I'm sure it's on the horizon as school starts. So
Yeah.
I'm super curious about this call tonight.
Yeah, I'm so glad you're here. We wanted to be practical about this with people who are in your kind of role and with other teachers. I live in Anderson Township, where it just hit the fan like in the last few weeks with a school board meeting, and there was a lot of kickback and people on both sides of this. Oh boy. Let's see.
Were you participant? Were you at the school?
No, I was an observer. I was not in the meeting. I was listening to the reports about it, and also part of the discussion on Nextdoor app, which really got inflamed by that type of conversation. Well, there's a sort of a Democratic political group called Biden-Harris Group on Nextdoor that was discussing it as well, that I happen to be part of, and so I knew that it was really hitting the fan here.
Gotcha.
The principal was trying to write a fine line. The superintendent of the schools was trying to write a tightrope on that. And
sure.
I think our question was, did we feel we got a good education about this as in our educational system? I'm not sure. Was it focused on elementary and high school, or was it focused on any type of education in college?
It didn't say it all. And so my immediate response would be, I'm learning things today as a participant in this work that I was never exposed to, even as a Black person. I never knew. And I feel like we're doing a book study on caste, the word caste, the book Caste by Isabel Wilkerson.
Yes, I'm familiar with the book.
One of the statements in the front is by Albert Einstein, and talking about, like, if we knew the ills, right, perhaps we wouldn't replicate them. And so I feel like perhaps if my generation and people prior to me and the kids now were just aware, like as I work with a student group and they are predominantly white appearing students, them just learning, it's like, oh my gosh, like I never knew. And so my solid answer is no. I mean, I think it was 11th grade when I had a choice to read a text, and that's the first time I saw myself represented in a work of fiction, coming from the school, right? And it was a choice. It wasn't something that we all read as a class. And I just felt like, wow, who knew this type of literature even existed?
Where did you go to school?
I went to Forest Park High School, which is now Winton Woods. So I don't know how much time we have, and I can be verbose, so I'll stop.
We have a half hour.
Well, Danita, I grew up in rural northern Indiana in a very small town with 92 people in my class. We had our 50th high school reunion last weekend, and a couple of us were talking about how none of us ever even experienced a relationship with a person of color other than white until we got into college. There was not a single person of color in any of our classes all 12 years. And we were only 20 miles from South Bend, Indiana, where there would have been plenty, but we weren't in any sports conferences, or anything where we mixed. However, I had a Black roommate by choice during college for 1 year. It was one of the best things we ever did. And I learned as I went, and I also am still learning like you are. I didn't ever even hear of the term critical race theory till about 6 months ago. Just trying to be aware. I have been involved in anti-racism training and curriculum for a number of years now. But my first experience of even being in solidarity with Black Lives Matter was only, I would say 5 years ago.
Mhm.
So I'm really learning a lot. What about you, Ray Jane?
There were African American folks in my high school, but I did not socialize with them. I was a very wallflower person at that time, and I didn't have very many friends in high school anyway because we moved around a lot. So I didn't start working on racial justice stuff until about 2014. And I think the first Black Lives Matter protest in Cincinnati, I took part in.
What can I ask, like, what in 2014, what was it that even
My
made you
church
aware?
decided we needed to work on racial justice issues. And so I became active at that time just because our denomination was and is going through some soul searching about how we've handled Black people in the past. So
Claire, what was your reasoning for joining anti-racism work?
I lived in Australia for 7 years prior to moving here 5.5 years ago, and I got very involved in anti-racism work through the church I was part of there in the capital city, and I became very good friends with a number of Aboriginal people. There's similar dynamics between how they have, the Aboriginal folk have been oppressed and not treated fairly legally throughout the last century or so. Well, even for 200 years, ever since white people came to that country, there were frontier wars against them. They were trying to be exterminated. They confiscated the children and tried to Australianize, capture them and put them in white families. Same stuff that we're just discovering in the news of going on in Canada and here lately. You know how they put them in special vocational schools. All that was happening in Australia as well. And so I was part of many discussions about that there, and then that really heightened my awareness. Now I'm trying to translate it. As soon as I came back in 2018, a very good friend of mine that I have known for about 20 years, who is Afro-American, she was organizing the first Black Lives Matter rally in Chicago, the first one ever. And she told me about it, and I was living in Chicago temporarily near my daughter till I figured out what job I was going to do when I came back. You know, I was just back in the States for a month. And so I went and I participated in it. It was very profound experience. We were walking around major offices and under the bean down there, you know, at the main park, Millennium
when
Park.
was that?
This was in July of, I had just arrived in June back from Australia, and it was July of 2018. No, not, what am I saying? Not 18, 15. July of 2015. It was 6 years ago. 6 years ago this month. Yeah, right about this time. Almost exactly 6 years ago. That's when BLK movements really got cranked up in Chicago. So, you know, all of that was really eye-opening for me.
Yeah, and Surge in Cincinnati organized in 2018.
I think that's right.
Maybe, yeah, I think we organized like at the end of 2018. And then we faltered and fell apart and then reorganized just in 2020 again. So
So is
I,
it just white people that are a part of the organization?
no,
no,
Okay, so that's what I heard when I came on. So I was like, okay, because I heard what she said, right? Like and I totally hear that. Like, then I was like, oh shoot, am I not supposed to be here? I just got the
no.
text.
no, you're needed and wanted because you're, you know, you're involved in this work and interest, obviously.
Absolutely.
And we have another person named Karen on the steering committee who's Afro-American or Black, however you would like,
Right.
whatever term.
Mhm.
And she's been very valuable for us on the steering committee. But the goal of the whole movement of Surge is to help white people become good allies
Mhm.
without, you know, we have a conviction that it's improper to expect Black representatives to do all the work to educate everybody, the whites,
Mhm.
you know.
Mhm. Mhm.
we need our own education, and we need to help educate people who are white all the time, and it shouldn't just be left to those who are struggling with racism or feeling oppressed by racism to be the ones to teach us.
Mhm.
What would you say in addition to that, Ray Jane?
I definitely agree totally. So besides our general meetings, Donita, we do, I have to say we haven't done it for probably 3 months, but we do, so you want to talk about race?
Oh yeah.
And we've done and talked about that TED Talk.
Mhm.
And then we have our core meetings, of course, weekly. And we've participated in, oh, darn. My brain is not working. There's an organization in Dayton, and there's a Dayton Surge too, that supports a woman who has started an organization that helps mothers and wives of incarcerated folks.
Mhm.
And we worked with her and held a rally at Payette Park and Garfield Park last summer.
Mm-hmm.
And then we had folks, of course, us old folks didn't participate because when the COVID was out there.
In the middle of COVID, right.
But we had folks marching during the protests in Cincinnati after the murder of George Floyd. So besides the education, we also, you know,
You
try
have
to
an
walk
active
the walk.
component. Mhm.
Yeah, I've only been involved myself in Surge specifically since mid-November after the election. But I've been more involved for several years with what's called the Southwest Ohio Poor People's Campaign movement. And there's a lot of correlation between the two, but you've probably heard of that, the Poor People's Campaign.
Yes.
Yeah, and I'm going Sunday to Washington, D.C. as one of the faith leaders from Ohio to that campaign where we're gathering people from all over the country to impress on our senators to get moving on abolishing the filibuster and supporting the right to vote. You know, to supporting For the People Act and so forth. There's a whole list of demands. But
Okay,
faith
so
leaders in the
I'm gonna close out our rooms here.
Okay.
Okay.
And I'll see you back.
Donita, I'm really glad that you're
Yeah,
part
it's
of this
great that you
tonight.
came.
And I appreciate you all's hospitality and explanation and your vulnerability.
See you back.
We're all learning. We're all learning.
So it'll take a minute for these guys to come back. I had to close the rooms. Welcome back, everyone.
Is everyone back? It looks like it's still trickling back in.
Trickling.
I'm still finishing dinner, so forgive my skyline, everyone.
Yummy.
It's apparently cheese coney day today.
Oh yeah, I've read that on Facebook.
They on sale.
No, I don't think so. We're just
Well, my
supposed to buy them
husband-
anyway.
My husband sent a note in our family group chat and I was like, I already have shrimp defrosting. So we're not gonna have that today, but I wondered if there was like a special.
I don't think it's on sale. I think if you were like commented
Is it
first
back
on their
now?
Facebook post or whatever, you got a coney. But yeah, if you've got shrimp, I'm sure that's
It
better
was
than the coney.
delish.
Okay, so how did it go, everybody? Good. Would, can we have just one person share, just quickly share some, maybe something that struck you out of your discussion that you feel it would be okay to share, that is, with the group. And instantly, we do ask that whatever is shared in this group stays in this group, although it is being recorded, so I don't know what that's.
I don't think the breakout rooms are recorded.
They're not reported.
No.
Okay, so anything that you share here could potentially be revealed to outsiders, so nothing too personal, put it that way. You know, hey, anyone about any of your, and you have to say your question when you share, because we all had slightly different questions. Let's hear from someone about their upbringing, in their schools, if they felt, how did you feel about how culturally responsive your education was?
I think Donita should share.
I was gonna say I can share for our group. I met Ray, Jane, and Claire, and we had lots of discussion. Probably the smallest amount was around the question, and I would say that across the board, probably none of us felt like there was intentional education around race or equity or any of those things. Some of us had not been exposed to people of color in our upbringing until, later years in education, like college. Or there were people, but we didn't have connections with them. And I specifically shared I had not read any literature intentionally until 11th grade, and it was a choice. The teacher suggested several options that we could read, and that was my first really kind of connection. I had a colleague that was on here earlier and she had to leave. She actually works with primary students, and today they're sharing words and literature and information with students as early as kindergarten. So it's very different than our own upbringing.
So Donita, may I ask you how you feel about that? Like, do you feel like your experience would have been better, or you would have felt more connected, or would have learned better if you'd had a more culturally responsive education?
Absolutely. Not only for myself as a Black person, but I feel like Many of the students that I work with are Asian, and this past year with, the surge in hate crimes, it's a blind spot for me. And so I've done some learning around just different things in various Asian cultures, and those students weren't aware either, right? Like, so there are many things in our American just educational system where we don't learn about each other. And those are just a couple cultures that I'm just mentioning. There are several others, but I think us understanding some history helps us to understand why we are where we are today. Not that we have to replicate it, but just to understand it's in the fabric, it's in the tapestry of our systems. And so absolutely, I feel like learning is helpful. And then the students that I work with today, we had a couple of kids present actually at a conference today. And they're white appearance students, but who definitely echo the same thing. If I had known this information before, I wish I had been exposed to it a little bit earlier. So as they go on into their college experiences or gap years or whatever, they're just differently equipped.
Thank you so much for sharing. How about someone from the second group that talked about what topics do you believe should be covered in schools? And what do you believe is important to cover? Why do you believe it's important to cover those topics? And I just want to throw in that some of these bills are saying, or at least one of them says specifically that students should not be allowed to talk about current events in the classroom. They use those words. So what do you feel should be allowed to and welcome to be discussed? What kind of topics? Anybody really?
All right. I took some notes from our group, so I can
Thank you.
go ahead.
Okay.
So we talked about a couple different things. One was just introducing the concept of systemic problems and self-reinforcing problems in the first place. Because especially once you get to high school, these are concepts that they can start to learn about how they exist and can be like separate, but interacting with laws and cultures and structures. We also talked about just knowing accurate history. None of us really learned much detail, and certainly not much about the messy parts, except that they were over. And also just more about how complicated some things are. Like even in like once you get to high school, a lot of history classes are still just sequence of events and not really about what was behind that and different people feeling different ways at different times. And yeah, this kind of complexity. So I don't know if Jeremy and Karen, if you think I missed anything, please.
I would just, can you hear me?
Yeah, pretty much
I
covered
was
what
just,
we said.
well, I was just gonna say, when the Roots came out, like back in the day, and people were like, oh, at work, they were like, no, it wasn't that bad. I'm like, it wasn't that good. We live on the Ohio River, and that's a whole big deal about enslavement. And, but also the history is not, and I'm gonna shut up so Jeremy can talk. And I showed a book by this man, A Different Mirror by Ronald Kataki, where he talked about the different ethnic groups besides the Native Americans who were here before we got here. But we have not been taught, we don't know, but we created a culture and a nation on things that we have no idea about. So I'm done.
So I guess something that I did not think that I only kind of, for some reason, I only just now got reminded of or to think of that I didn't think of during our breakout room was something that I think should be covered is what would you even call this? Something I think that would be very useful to cover is historically how I guess how racism is instituted, or something like racism is instituted. I mean, we kind of have. So in school, when you're taught about like things like racism or sexism, you're kind of taught about this idea that like people start out as like hating people who are not like them, or being because they're unfamiliar with people who are not like them. We don't really spend a lot of time talking about people who intentionally don't want to like people who are not like them. Like for example, I mean, you learn something about World War II and you learn a bit about Nazis. Well, we don't really spend a lot of time really learning about Nazis, like how historically how you ferment, like how you turn people against a certain subset of people, and things like that. That's not the sort of detail you go into. Well, when that part of history is taught, and that has a lot of relevance, I feel.
Mhm.
Exactly. It seems like I mean, you can't help but think that kids, young people in general, are hungering to have a better understanding of the complexity of the world they see around them today, right? We can't avoid seeing it, rather alone experiencing it, right? But I fear that if we're not really talking about accurate history, and now we're saying we're not going to talk about current events, then what the heck are we going to talk about? I mean, what are kids going to learn, that's really applicable to their day-to-day life? And I hear this from my soon to be 7th grader all the time. He's like, Mom, none of this stuff is really applicable to my life. And I'm like, well, yeah, all that math really is. You're really going to use it. I mean, I don't know how to convince you of that, but I mean, but I can't help but think that there really are a lot more lessons that could be included that really are more applicable and help kids understand kind of the workings of the world today without, it doesn't have to be overwhelming or depressing either, or cause division. There are a lot of curricula out there that are well researched or age appropriate, and and they tell teachers, they don't tell them, they offer them options for ways to bring these lessons into the classroom, in a good way. So well, I don't want to stay too long on this conversation because I really
there was another breakout room. They should be able to talk, and then there was no number 4. So
there was no, actually okay. So I was in breakout room number 3. What concerns you most about the anti-CRT bills and why?
Yeah, I think Harry should speak for us. I really appreciated hearing Harry's point of view in our conversation.
Exactly. Harry, go ahead.
You can stay off camera if you don't want to turn your camera on.
Yeah, actually, my camera doesn't work. That's not.
Okay.
It's not intentional. I think one of the reasons that they're asking me to do this is because I probably come at this from a little bit different perspective than everyone here. I am a lawyer and I am a conservative, and I am interested in the topic. I don't know much about what's going on one way or the other, but I am concerned with some of the bills, and we were in definite agreement that all 3 of us, that the number one concern is that that maybe there are things that you don't want children to be taught are true and are really a viewpoint, but how can they decide what their viewpoint is if folks don't talk about what all the viewpoints are? And if you don't have an accurate teaching of history, how can people decide what they feel about things? And so we're really concerned that it would stifle, some of these bills would stifle good discussion that should be happening.
Well put, Harry. Okay, did anyone have anything else you wanted to add to that? It was a great discussion. I wish we had a lot longer. Feels like it's just the tip of the iceberg, but I do have a lot more that I wanted to cover today. So I'm going to go ahead and get us back to our presentation. And how do I do that, Ray Jane? I got to share my screen again, or can you see it now?
Nope, we can't see it.
Okay, I have to share it again. I'm sorry, hold on just 1 second. I should have practiced this more, guys. Share, okay, hold on. It's covered up. Oh, wait, okay, share screen, here we go.
No,
Okay.
kids go into presentation mode.
There you go. Okay, so that was our first one. And so, I mean, I do want to reiterate what Glenn Singleton spells out about courageous conversations around, race. They require us to stay engaged. They require us to feel discomfort. We have to speak our truth, and we have to expect and accept non-closure, because obviously, these conversations have been going on a long time, and they're going to need to go on a lot longer time. And that's okay. It's an evolution, right? It's all about all of our own personal growth. So I just wanted to ask, we can share this openly, talk about this openly together. What would you like to see happen in regards to the anti-CRT bills? How can we turn this negative into a positive? Can you think of anything positive that could come out of this, in other words? Anybody?
I think one thing that interests me, I was thinking about it with what you're saying, Harry, and I actually have a lot of conservative and family and friends who are not against teaching about race and racism in schools. So I think it would be a positive if we could actually flip this narrative. Like, no, this is not something that's always clearly along conservative liberal sides, and there are plenty of people who want their kids to be exposed to different viewpoints, even if they're not Democrats. So I think it would be a win if we can get more people saying, hey, I don't know about this. Like, I am conservative, but I don't know about this law.
Yeah, that's a great point.
No, I think that, for me, I agree with that. I would like it. And, as a conservative, there are some fears that we have about, educational institutions sometimes that, for us, a positive would be, discussions about the marketplace of ideas, that schools are places where you talk about and where it's okay to explore without suddenly, being, persona non grata or whatever. And it kind of almost a reaffirmation that, that education is the place where you talk about ideas and you debate them, and you can do so in a respectful manner. You can do so, obviously we're human, we can all do that, and that we can, that sometimes it might be okay to disagree on certain topics and take it from there.
I love that perspective. I also so I homeschooled our kids for several years, and so there's distrust of the educational system sometimes from both extremes.
Yeah.
Like, you find all kinds of people in that homeschooling community too. And what I see with things like this, it's first off, it's generating a lot of conversation. So it gets people talking, which is always an opportunity.
Yeah.
And anytime you start picking apart what's going on with this education, then there's an opportunity created for a different kind of change than anybody is looking for, like this different third path kind of thing where, maybe we should look at these state curriculum requirements. Maybe people should be having more constructive conversations in the classroom and be less targeted on what was the sequence of wars in the 15th through 17th century.
Mhm.
And so, that's kind of a silly example, but it's still there is so much structure, and there are so many things that are on the agenda to discuss in the classroom. And if we say, hey, there is no agenda in the classroom, there's no conservative agenda in the classroom, there's no liberal agenda in the classroom. This isn't a democratic institution. It's the people, it's public school, and there need to be public conversations.
Very, very well. And, maybe a discussion could come out too about how accurate a history we've been depicting all along for the last, many decades about, and who all were included in that history. Maybe that can come out since we're going to be talking more, obviously more about curricula in detail. Considering the fact that the majority of teachers are white and majority of teachers are women, I mean, human nature is just that you will you tend to gravitate towards things that reflect your perspective. And so just by that, you would imagine that some perspectives are left out. I don't think it takes too far of a stretch of imagination to believe that. So anyway, I think that a lot of good relationships and knowledge could come out of this discussion, potentially, if it's done the right way. And so let's go ahead and move on. And thank you so much. You guys brought out so many great points. I just thank you so much for joining us and bringing your great perspectives tonight. So I did provide some talking points here. I didn't come up with these, but as far as what the counter narrative would be to these attacks about, doesn't teaching about racism undermine national unity? No, in fact, it's just the opposite. Racism is what prevents unity. Teaching about racism is simply teaching the truth about our society. You could go through and we could talk about those for days too, about, I am so sorry, I don't know why I keep doing that, about whether or not you feel the statements are true. But here are some counter talking points that I wanted to provide for you if you wanted to take a look at them. Unfortunately, we don't have time too much to go into it now. We all deserve an honest education about race in this country. So you can read them when you have more time. Now, we have another whole presentation put together about calling in, which is a term that Dr. Loretta Ross, a professor and human rights advocate at Smith College, has talked a lot about and written a book about, because she's acknowledged that, we all have to acknowledge that there's way too much calling out going on both sides, attempts to shame one another and blame one another for whatever, and it's not productive, right? So she wrote a book, she's writing a book, it's not out yet, but it's about the toxicity of this call out culture. And so just a few of the differences that she points out, I'm gonna just have to go over this really quickly, between calling out and calling in. Calling out's often done publicly, or it can be done publicly, in person or online. It assumes bad intentions of the offending party. And to me, this is one of the most important aspects of why we call people out, is that we're assuming something about their intentions. And many times we don't have any idea what their intentions are, right? So, if we could just not do that, I think it would make difficult conversations a lot better. Calling out intends to shame a person or group, and extreme calling out is when a person or group expresses this disagreement cruelly, sometimes grandstanding. Like-minded witnesses may join in, bystanders silently withdraw. So it ends up with increasingly polarized conversations, making learning less inviting. Calling in counters the toxicity of the calling out culture. It can be done privately or publicly. It gives the benefit of the doubt, and it invites all people to move forward together. We don't have people jumping on the bandwagon to blame, and we don't have people silently withdrawing because they're just too uncomfortable to even deal with the discourse that's happening. And K through 12 students can utilize calling in the classroom to avoid conflict escalation and create an affirming environment for all. So, I mentioned that calling in was a value of Surge. And one of the things about calling in is it's recognizing that we all mess up and that it's okay, right? There will be times undoubtedly in the classroom when a teacher's trying to create this calling in environment where a student will say something offensive to another student, another group of students, what have you, maybe without even knowing it. And it's an opportunity for those students to give them a break and say, okay, hold up, let's not freak out. Maybe he didn't mean it that way. Let's help him understand how we took it. And let's see his or her humanity first before we start jumping to conclusions about what he or she is trying to say. So calling in is not a guarantee that everyone will joyfully work together. It's simply the extension of grace, the opportunity to grow and to share learning and responsibility for each other, right? It's basically acknowledging, hey, we're in this together. We're in this complex society together. Let's try to understand each other. What will it hurt? And it involves an agreement between people that we're going to try to understand one another, right? We're not going to try to condescend and basically not understand one another. It's a conscious attempt to expand one another's perspectives, and it's done with love. Now, that may seem far-fetched, but it's at least done with acceptance that your perspective is different than mine, and that's okay. It's in an effort to teach about harmful language and explore why speakers choose to use it and why it's harmful to begin with. And it involves patiently asking questions to expand awareness and acknowledges the requirement for growth and a commitment to do better. Calling in can't minimize the harm or damage that's already inflicted. If someone's really said something that's very upsetting to folks, you can't take that back, but you can get to the root of why the injury occurred, why it hurt so much, and why the person chose to say it. It ensures that it will not happen again, because if we're in this classroom together and we're here in this classroom for a whole year, we can at least agree that we want to try to not insult one another's humanity, right? And so that's the basis of it. It works especially well when students call one another in, or when leaders such as teachers use it to model speaking up without losing the opportunity for learning. And that's what we adults really need to learn to do for our kids as well, right? We need to set the tone, we need to set the example, and should not insist that people hurt by cruel or careless language or actions be responsible for the personal growth of those who have injured them. In other words, involuntary emotional labor. One of the reasons why SURGE exists is because we, as white people, realize that people of color have had this emotional burden for far too long to explain to us why words that we choose to use hurt, why they feel as they feel, about inequalities. And
Rachel, do you have a question?
I do. I have something I want to kind of add that I've been thinking about through this whole discussion, which, I have, run across this concept of calling in before, and it's really beautiful. And I do wish that people would have, helped me with this kind of communication when I was a young kid. It's really, it's lovely. Something I've been noticing through it, though, is a very top-down kind of perspective where it's the teacher is calling in the students, or students are calling in other students. I would like to see this framed in a way such that kids would feel empowered to call in their elders who they see when they make a mistake.
very good. So Dr. Loretta Ross does talk about a calling in culture and how to create a calling in culture in the classroom. And you're right, that would include being able to call in the teacher and say, hey, we don't agree with that, or what, help us understand that, So that's a good point. It does require a certain openness to acknowledge that we're equals to a certain extent, right? Right, that I'm not the all-powerful one who's going to impart my wisdom on you, right? So it's a different way of approaching teaching and learning, which I'm all for. I am a lot like that in my relationship with my child. I tell him I make mistakes. I admit my mistakes, and I welcome him to point out my mistakes. It's not always easy. It's not, you know, they can't do it all the time at every minute of every day, but you know, there are limits with that. But yeah, I mean, I agree, and it's a great point. Any other thoughts around that? Okay, so I do just want to, what time is it? Is it 9 yet? It's 8:52.
You got you have 6 minutes.
Okay, so just a quick quote: by teaching our students how to call one another in, we're providing them the tools and skills they need to gather up those who share their privileges, to offer patience and grace when they can, and to facilitate growth so that the others won't have to. And so there you go. Now, calling in should not be, there are limits to calling in. And, you know, we at Surge, we don't say that we're going to have to call in all the time. We do use calling out when necessary. And there's even a middle option called calling on, which is basically saying, I beg your pardon. It's giving people a chance to clarify, right? When something really strikes you as, oh God, that's insulting or that's wrong. It's taking a breath and it's saying, please help me understand, right? But I'm not going to jump on the bandwagon of assuming your intentions are wrong or bad yet. I'm giving you an opportunity to explain yourself. So when calling in does not work is when powerful people use bigotry, fear, and lies to attack others. Okay, that, you know, you have to have a certain amount of good. What's the word? Intentions, willingness to listen, to learn in order for calling in to work, right? People knowingly use stereotypes or dehumanizing metaphors to describe human beings. No, that's not an opportunity to call them in. We're gonna call on them to change their wording, you know, or their intention, to help us understand where you're coming from here, because that's really not appropriate in this setting. When people victimize their targets and potentially set them up for violence, you know, that's not okay. When those who refuse to accept responsibility for the harm they encourage, or who pretend they are only innocently using their right to free speech, that's an opportunity to call people in or call them out. Say, what's, you know, this isn't right. We can't insult people like this. It's not true. We're not going to stand for it, right? But at least this is a construct, a way to begin to have other tools at our disposal other than just jumping to blaming and shaming people, right? Because it seems like we're seeing more and more of that everywhere we go, right? So we need, and you know, like I said, there could be whole workshops, there are whole workshops taught about how to really listen to one another in these kinds of difficult conversations. And undoubtedly, as this, to bring it back to critical race theory and the debate that's going on with this, undoubtedly teachers, administrators are going to be encountering people who are legitimately confused, right, about what's going on. And they have legitimate concerns. And it would not be right to immediately just, you know, jump to the conclusion that they have bad intentions, that they have some kind of an agenda. No, you know, I think all administrators and teachers and students would benefit by learning, you know, to call in. And I think a lot of teachers are probably already using this. A lot of students are probably already using this. But, you know, a lot of us have a long way to go in, you know, learning how to do that. It's not always easy. So unfortunately, that's going to be about all we have time for. We are providing you with some links at the end of this slideshow. You're going to get to, you have the link for the entire slideshow, by the way. And so these are some resources if you want to go in deeper, learning more about the counter response to the critical race theory or anti-critical race theory efforts. And also, we just want to say that we thank you so much for joining us. And if you are interested in receiving support in your current situation or learning more about Surge or getting involved with Surge, we'd love to speak with you. Please just put your name and number in the chat, and we'll be glad to follow up with you really soon.
I also dropped our chapter email address in the chat, and we will be sending follow-up information later this week with the slides and everything. So
Great, great. Thank you so much, Harry and Danita and Jeremy and all the folks who joined us for the first time. We hope to see you again.